Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. We are going to be covering managing performance effectively. My name is Max Smith. Most of you all know I'm the Communications Director for 501c Services. For those of you who don't know us, we are a 100% employee-owned company, and we provide alternatives to state-run unemployment insurance programs. We currently work with more than 1,500 nonprofits nationally. We administer the 501c Agencies Trust, which offers a comprehensive suite of risk management services and multiple stop-loss protection solutions for its 501c3 nonprofit members. And we also operate You Insure, which is a first dollar unemployment insurance program. Like I said earlier, many of you working with us today are already working with us, and we really appreciate that and hope you will continue doing so. I have a couple of quick housekeeping items before I introduce Stephanie and hand the program off to her. So many of you all are here today for your HRCI or SHRM credits. We will be providing you those. I will email those to you later today. What you're going to need to do for me, though, is when the program concludes, a poll will pop up. You need to complete that poll for me. One of the questions in the poll is whether or not you want HRCI, SHRM, or both. So make sure you indicate that to me. I'll review the polling data later today and email everybody the appropriate credit. If you miss it on the pop-up or you have another meeting afterwards, I will be sending you a follow-up email about an hour after the program that will also have a link to that same poll. So if you have to jet for lunch or another meeting, don't worry about it. That poll will get emailed to you later. Also, the materials for today. Stephanie's slides are available to you currently right now. If you go to your GoToWebinar browser there's a handout section. So there's a PDF of her slides right there right now. You can download those now and follow along. We will also provide you with a link to those later today in that email that has the poll. Stephanie is going to go ahead and breeze through this stuff this morning. She's going to take questions at the end. But if you do have a question, if it pops up, go ahead and submit it in the questions section of the GoToWebinar browser there, and we'll keep track of those, and then she will cover them all at the end. But she's going to go ahead and take questions at the end. So hopefully she'll probably answer all your questions before the end of the program anyhow. So I'm going to get ready to hand this off to Stephanie. We need to switch control here. But she's a friend and colleague. She owns and operates HR Design for You, and she's a certified HR professional operating near Chicago. So Stephanie, if you're ready, I'm going to give you control here so we can see your screen. Let me know if you have any problems on your end. Yes,
all right, can you see my screen?
Absolutely, we're good to go.
All right, great. Thanks, Mac, for that introduction. Like you said, my name is Stephanie Martinez. I'm the CEO and founder of HR Design for You, which is an HR consulting firm. Today, I'm presenting on managing performance effectively, and I think just overall, this is such a critical topic. You know, we're dealing in a marketplace that is so tight for talent. Everyone is competing aggressively to attract, retain those high-level candidates, those high performers. So we as managers really have to focus on how can we manage, develop, and engage our talent every day. So a little bit about my background. I've been in HR for about 19 years. I'm a certified professional, like Max said, and I've worked both in the public and private sector throughout a wide variety of industries, whether that's financial services, higher education, healthcare, trading, nonprofit, union, non-union, you name it, I've worked in it. So I feel like that wide variety of experience can really help organizations develop the appropriate strategies for their people and their workforce. So a little bit about my company. One of the services that we offer is really figuring out what your organizations need to succeed, and that's figuring out what you're doing today, creating customized solutions, and that could be a strategic planning, it could be a SWOT analysis, it could be workforce planning, But whatever we do, we really want to help develop your leaders and teams so that you have a successful strategy going forward. The other service that we offer is interim HR. So this could be for a company who doesn't have HR today or is looking to implement HR, to run the day-to-day or to fill in for an HR person that may be on leave. So we can run or develop that HR department for you. Or we can also come in and do an employee relations investigation. So if you received a sexual harassment claim, you're not really sure how to handle it, or maybe you need an objective party from the outside to do the investigation, document, and then provide some recommendations on next steps, we could do that as well. So our learning objectives for today is really packed with lots and lots of information, as you can see. I wanted to be thorough and really give you everything I possibly could to set you up for success. So the first thing is, let's set expectations and goals right off the bat. Let's develop and reward our employees. Let's decide what our performance evaluation cycle looks like and the types of evaluations that we could utilize. What's the feedback frequency that's most recommended? When performance starts to decline, how should we approach the issue? How do we have crucial conversations? How do we figure out the root cause? And how do we document those issues? And what are some of the best practices for disciplinary processes? And if we don't do all these things, ultimately, what's the consequence? And then next step, so you know kind of what's your plan for moving forward from this conversation. So I'd like to do a poll next and figure out how many of you are doing performance evaluations today. So you can either answer yes or no.
Okay, so I've launched that for you, Stephanie. We'll give everybody about 10 seconds to complete it. I'm coming in. Okay, we'll go ahead and close it. And the results are, I'm going to share it here. 87% said they do, and 13% said they do not.
Okay, so kind of what I was expecting. I think it's great that we have such a high number of individuals that are doing performance evaluations today. That's really positive. And then for those that don't do them, I think this is an opportunity for you to kind of see what we have to offer and if this is something that you want to implement going forward. So the first step is really setting expectations with the employee right off the bat. So you have a brand new employee, you want to create that strong foundation with them. So you want to start with, I think really at the very beginning is, what's the company's why? If you read the book from Simon Sinek, why are we doing this work? What's the mission of our organization? Get them passionate about what the organization does. Then review the employee's job description, make sure they're clear on expectations of their role. Set goals and objectives, so make sure they understand what they're set to accomplish, but get their input, and maybe with a new employee you may not have that. Strategize on those action steps so that you can kind of see the roadmap. Then you want to meet quarterly and update, the employee on their performance, if there's any changes in goals or deadlines so that everyone's on the same page. And then throughout the process, provide coaching, mentoring, and if there's any training needs to fill in any skill gaps, make sure that you're offering that. And then monitor progress as you go through. I think one critical thing just to keep in mind is a lot of organizations are investing a lot of time and energy into onboarding programs to really ensure that employees have the most information about the company so that they're really set up for success to do their job. Because when there isn't enough transparency about what we do, how we do it, how we can sell the organization, how we can be better players within the organization, it really helps them get off and running a lot faster. So how do we set goals? So the first step, I think, that tends to get missed is talking about the employee's personal strengths, their career goals and aspirations, really getting to know the employee inside and out. And the reason why I say this is such a critical step is, we have to understand what the employee is really capable of. And that helps us, launch into training if we need to, if they have some deficiencies right off the bat. We don't have to wait. In addition, if you find out if they have some really great strengths that you could apply elsewhere in the organization, they become this excellent resource, which helps them feel more fulfilled because they can utilize all their skills. The worst thing you can do is underutilize an employee. Next, you want to establish SMART goals. So we've all heard about this. We want goals to be specific. They should be measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. Time-bound is usually the one I see missing. And the goals, people don't put deadline dates on things, and then there's some sort of ambiguity there. So step 3, you want to connect the employee's goals to the department and organizational goals. And again, this is an opportunity for them to really see the big picture. They want to be able to understand how what they're doing today contributes to the overall organization success. And I would tell you overall, the more you give people the freedom and flexibility to shape their own path, the more committed they are to the goals and to the organization as a whole. And then the last step, identify how you will measure success. So are you going to use key performance indicators, which are KPIs? Are you going to measure success by the amount of revenue generated? Is it what they accomplish and how they accomplish? So think about that measurement process so everybody's clear from the get-go. And then I think the next thing is, how are you going to develop your employee? Because again, we're talking about war on talent, creating that employee experience that's going to be measured, that's really going to, make it sticky. The person wants to stay, they enjoy working with you, and when you develop your employee, you invest in their future. And you can do this by spending time with them, getting to know them, sharing your knowledge, and having those shared values and a connection with the employee will make them feel more positive about their work and their connection to their leader overall. So some methods are, you can do training, there's certificate programs, different stretch assignments to kind of increase their capabilities. You could have them lead a team project or work on a cross-functional team, which I think is really effective because if it's an organizational initiative, they get to interact with others in different departments, which gives them a broader perspective of the organization as well as others' roles, and also gives them appreciation for those other roles where they may not have had that perspective before. Because I've heard in so many organizations, I feel like I'm in a silo, I don't know what anyone else does. This gives them that broader knowledge. And then you can also give them some other type of project, which could be a process improvement project. Overall, you want to lead by example. When you are a positive leader, people want to follow what you do, and they want to be just like you. So keep that in mind as well. And then you want to reward your employee. So understand their self-interest so you can reward them accordingly. What motivates them? What gets them excited? Not everybody likes public gratification. Some want to be rewarded privately, or they want you to express gratitude privately. You want to reward your team. There's financial rewards that you can extend, or paid time off. Maybe they value time with their family, or they like to travel. You could provide a flexible work schedule, so maybe they're working from home part of the time. You can provide educational reimbursements or gift cards. So what should your performance management cycle look like? And I've just kind of provided an example of a model you could potentially use. And, some of the key steps here is you're planning, you're acting, you're tracking, and you're reviewing. But ultimately, everything starts with defining and communicating the organization's goals. And with those goals, you know what you're shooting for, but you're also looking at the values of your organization, because the values help drive how we make decisions, how we treat each other in the process, because it's not just what you do, it's how you do it. So set those SMART objectives right in the beginning, get agreement on them. Make sure that the employee is acting on them so they're achieving those objectives, and you can always course correct or implement any personal development plans for training purposes. Then you want to track their progress. Give them regular feedback. Figure out if there are obstacles that are standing in their way, which is prohibiting them from doing the best that they can do. Always ask, how can I help you? How can I help my team succeed? That's what I'm here for as your leader. And then, if you need to also negotiate any deadlines, you want to do that for them. Because the more you go to bat for your employees, the more they see that you're truly invested in their success and that we're not all just individuals trying to complete a bunch of tasks. And then review the achievements with them. Hey, you did a great job. That was awesome. Let's talk about your future career goals, and then agree on those actions. So a couple of different types of evaluations are out there, and you have to figure out what's really going to be effective for your business and your workforce. Because everyone's different. Generally you can use the performance appraisal, looking at skills or competencies, and competencies are comprised of knowledge, skills, and abilities. So sometimes they're around accuracy or leadership skills or specific role competencies. And then there's management by objectives. So this kind of evaluation would focus on goals and achieving those goals. Sometimes it's a pass or a fail. Sometimes it's a rating scale on how they achieve those goals. And I've typically done a goal-setting form comprised with competencies as well. And those can be organizational competencies, so what they need to succeed in order to be in our organization, or they could be role-specific. Then there's project evaluation reviews. So typically I've seen this in a consulting environment. So the consultant has specific engagements that they're on with a specific project leader who's different than their direct supervisor. And that individual would fill out an evaluation after the engagement is over, present it back to the supervisor incorporates it into the overall performance evaluation. The 360 appraisal is typically used for leaders, and we're trying to gauge just kind of an understanding of how they are doing as a leader. So we're getting peer information, we're getting information from their direct reports, we're getting information from their supervisors, and if they have exposure to cross-functional teams or maybe the board of directors, we might incorporate that feedback into the overall assessment and then help them develop from there. And then the employee self-assessment is a great tool to really understand how is the employee feeling about their own performance. Are they kind of disjointed with the way you see their performance? And this is a great way to provide some clarity and understanding to your expectations versus theirs. And then ranking, I've typically seen this with companies that you've already done the evaluation, but now you're trying to rank kind of your best to worst employees. You may use this tool for a workforce planning session or maybe a succession planning session, because you're trying to decide who are my high performers, how am I going to motivate them, what are some things that I need to do, and maybe you're also defining, these are my poor performers, I need to start taking action with them. And then a checklist is typically when you're trying to gauge, what the employee has learned maybe in the first 30, 60, 90 days. Do they know how to do this? Yes or no? So that's a pretty quick evaluation. So I'd like to take another poll to really gauge how often are you providing feedback to your employees. So is it A, weekly, B, quarterly, C, once a year, or D, not at all?
Go ahead and launch that. We'll give everybody a moment to find their mices. All right, go ahead and close it. And can you see the results, Stephanie?
I can't.
Okay, so it's weekly is 30%, quarterly is 29%, once a year is 37%, and not at all is 4%.
Okay, great. Thank you. So it's great to see that there's 30%, speaking on a weekly basis. That's great. And 29% quarterly. So that's also wonderful. You want to be in that group once a year. I would definitely look into that. That's not as frequent as you want to be. So that leads into our next topic, which is feedback frequency. So I strongly believe in coaching in the moment. I've done this with my own direct reports. As soon as we have a meeting, maybe the meeting didn't go well, I'm immediately pulling them into an office and having a conversation. Hey, what did you think about that meeting? How do you think it went? What did you think of their questions? What was their body language looking like? So I'm inquiring. I want to know what the employee thinks first before I provide my insight. And then I add some tidbits on how they can improve the next time. And then the next time they have a meeting, we have another session just to see was there improvement or not. Quarterly checkpoints are great because it's just a reminder to say, hey, you know what, I'm going to meet with my employees on a quarterly basis because typically things are changing rapidly and we need those opportunities to readjust. And then if you have a really high priority project, you may be meeting with your people weekly just because it's necessary. Everything is moving so fast that those updates are critical. And then I would say overall, you don't want to wait till the end of the year to do an evaluation. It doesn't create a positive relationship with the employee when they get to hear all their feedback at the end of the year as opposed to all throughout. It doesn't leave them opportunities to do any improvement. And I would say, although the performance evaluation could be your point of documentation, that once a year evaluation isn't enough. From a legal standpoint, we're always asked, to your HR individual, hey, did you give this person an opportunity to improve? Did you implement some good faith efforts? If we don't do that, we're looked at negatively, and typically, like if you're going through an unemployment hearing, you're probably going to lose it because if we don't give them notification and opportunities to improve, it looks poorly on the employer. And overall, you just want to keep a good relationship with your employee. Because that's what you'd want, right? You'd want somebody to tell you if something was going wrong. So when performance declines, the first thing I always ask managers to do is take a step back. Really assess what you've done so far. Have I done everything I possibly could to set them up for success? So some of the questions I've outlined here is really talking about, did I set clear objectives for them? Did I provide feedback so they can make course corrections? Are there any skill gaps? Do they need to be retrained? If you're going to do any retraining, make sure you document it. Hey, these are the things I trained them on, and they're going to sign it. I'm going to sign it and date it, and it's going to go in their personnel file. That's great documentation. Does this person have the appropriate resources? So maybe there's some things that I could help them that would get them to the next level. And then, more and more employees are looking for those remote opportunities, to work from home because the office environment is a little too distracting and they need some quiet time. And I totally agree with this. You may want to think about letting them work 1 to 2 days a week from home. And then if, you define that the career path is going in a different direction, then obviously that's a completely different conversation with the employee. So next, you may want to have a crucial conversation when you notice that there are some serious issues that you want to discuss. Let's just say you got a phone call from a client, not really happy about your employee's performance. Now you got to prepare for that conversation. And there's actually a book called Crucial Conversations. If you want to take a look at it, it'll give you more detail about all of these steps. So the first part is really stop yourself and really prepare for the conversation. Because I see so many managers that are so fired up, or the CEO just walked in their office and just, dropped a load on them, and now they're going after their employee to show that they're taking action. And I would say, hold back. Think about this. Calm yourself. What results do I really want for the employee, for the relationship, for myself, for the department, for the organization? Really understand your intentions about what you're trying to achieve. And then understand the self-interest of the employee. So what motivates them? What do they care about? Because you're going to frame your argument or kind of your action steps around that because you want to motivate them to do better. And then in the actual meeting, you want to create a safe environment. So, when I sit down with an employee, I keep my voice low and calm. I, let them know that, hey, I got this complaint from a client, but I really want to understand your story. What transpired? Give me a little bit more insight because I'm just having a hard time understanding. Well, I already made the first effort. I allow them to express themselves, tell me their story first before I just take what the client said at face value. I want to hear their side, and then I'm going to stop and I'm going to listen carefully. I'm not going to be formulating my next thoughts in my head. I'm really going to be listening to what they're saying. And everything you want to bring it back to facts, not emotions. Don't let your emotions drive you. Make sure that the emotions are not driving your employees. Say, hey, you know what? I understand you feel that way, but tell me the facts. I need to know exactly what happened step by step. And then encourage testing. So I want to make sure that we really understand what each other said. So provide some paraphrasing. Well, this is what I heard. I think I heard you say. Is that correct? Or, did you mean something different? That really continues to open the floor. We're all trying to understand each other. It feels very positive. And then lastly, you want to move to action. So you want to summarize your conversation. You want to understand who's doing what, by when, and how are we going to follow up. And I think it's great for managers just to let employees know, hey, I'm going to be following up by email just to summarize this conversation so they don't get put off by that. That's just a way for you to keep track of what's going on and what you said. And if there's any misunderstandings in what you wrote in the email, please follow up with a clarification. Keeps everybody, on the same page. And overall, within the conversations, you want to articulate and really show that you are committed to their success. Hey, I really enjoy working with you. You're a phenomenal employee. I want to see you grow, and that's why I'm really investing in this conversation. I want the best for you, and I really want to make sure that we're all on the same page. That can elevate the employee's feelings towards you incredibly. You're investing in that bank within them, and therefore, they're enjoying working with you. And honestly, the employee will feel more relieved the more common patient you are throughout the conversation. So what happens if this conversation does not go well? Many of you have heard of fight or flight. So if you went into that meeting just bulldozing, accusing them, hey, this client complained about you. I can't believe you acted this way. You're already in fight mode. That employee could mirror your same reaction, and now you're both fighting with each other. You're yelling, you're screaming. You're really not going to get to a good resolution, and you're probably going to damage the relationship, which is going to be twice as hard to fix. On the other end of the spectrum, that individual may not be a fighter. They're going to go into flight mode. And flight mode could either mean you silence them. They're so put off by how you're attacking them that they just have gone quiet. Typically when this happens, the individual is going to be less likely to share their opinions. They're going to lose some trust in you. They're not really going to know what their relationship status is with you. And they may be less motivated to work with you, which could be a reason why performance could decline as well. The other thing is they may altogether leave the meeting because they just don't like confrontation. So keep this in mind. Do you want to have a successful conversation where everybody is, learning and understanding from each other, or do you want to be fighting with the individual and potentially ruining the relationship? So sometimes when we have crucial conversations, we still have an issue figuring out what is the root cause. We've done some data gathering, but I'm still not sure what the problem is and how to advise them. So I really tell managers, take the time to figure out what's really at the root of this issue. And sometimes we find out, the individual just has poor time management. And we may find that out by asking them to catalog what they do every day for a week, 2 weeks, a month. And then we start saying, okay, well, I do see that you have a lot on your plate, and maybe some of this should go to a different individual. Maybe we figure out there's some technology that they could use to speed up the process. Maybe there's just inefficiencies in our process overall that we have to fix as an organization. So these can be really great exercises in figuring out what's going wrong and then how you can better advise them on next steps so that they can be more successful in the future. So now we're coming to the documentation process, and I really feel like this comes more into play when you're doing more serious documentation. You've had a couple of coaching sessions with the employee. Things are not really coming together or improving. The first step I would say is consult with HR. So many times I'll see managers let things get way out of hand, and then by the time they come to me, they're just ready to fire the person. And it's just, you didn't do any documentation. We've got nothing to back it up. And I understand, many states are at-will states, so you can terminate when you want, but the risk in that is potential lawsuits. So I say start with HR. There's sometimes many more arms and legs to the issue than you really understand. And because of our level of experience, we can advise you appropriately on what steps to take. And sometimes there needs to be an investigation prior to a write-up that we may have to conduct for you. So if HR advises you to do a write-up, I say first address the issue. And what I mean by that is I ask managers typically to put things in buckets of problems. So let's just say there's three top buckets. One may be accountability. That person lacks taking accountability. Maybe there's a competency issue. This person has lack of skill sets in specific areas. And then maybe third is their attitude that they bring to work every day. And then I'm going to have them write specific examples under each of those three buckets. How has this person represented that? And then we're going to talk about how it impacts the business. So that all needs to be in the write-up. How is it impacting the business? How is it impacting the team? So are we losing revenue? Is it lowering employee morale? Is it causing other people to take on their work? All of that should be in the write-up. And then finally, you're identifying actions on what behaviors you want to see changed. So what is success going to look like to you? And then you're defining some time periods. When do you want this to be completed? When do I want to see improvement? And at the end of the write-up, you typically have a phrase line that says, if I don't see improvement immediately, further action could be taken up to and including termination. So throughout this process, you really want to evaluate how the employee is doing and making sure that you're having frequent check-ins. So the best practices for disciplinary action usually fall into these two areas, and you'll have to check your employee handbook just to see, what your organization has defined as the appropriate disciplinary action process. And the first way is you start with a verbal warning, which is you've already had a couple verbal coaching sessions. This one's going to be officially documented, even though it's verbal. You'll have a verbal conversation just between the manager and the employee. You're going to talk about those three buckets or two buckets or whatever it is, providing examples, talking about how they're going to improve, what's the follow-up, how often are you going to meet. Then you're going to summarize that in an email, send it to the employee. You may copy HR so that we start understanding that the conversation has started. And then the next step could be a written warning. So anything from a written warning and beyond, HR is involved in those conversations. And again, these may be different. If you have a union environment, you'd have to, consult your union contract. And the written warning is similar, except now it's on an official document. You're going to go through it with HR and the employee. HR is really there to be your witness. You don't want this to be a he said, she said thing. HR is the objective party to really document what happens. We're there to keep the calm, and we're there to ensure that everybody understands what we're going to be doing going forward so it doesn't get heated and that we have successful endings. And so everybody will sign up on that written warning, date it, it goes into the personnel file. Then there's the final written warning, similar to the written warning, and then termination. And upon termination, HR is there doing the termination with the manager. So any of these steps can be moved up. So let's say you give a verbal warning, and for some reason you find out that this individual has been maybe harassing an employee, and you have a no tolerance policy around harassment. You may move directly to termination depending on how egregious that harassment was. So just note, again, this has to be written in your employee handbook that you can skip steps based on the nature of the incident, but that's one way to do it. Another way is called a performance improvement plan, or a PIP. Typically, they're 30, 60, or 90 days. I've used this tool mainly for my more seasoned professionals because these individuals are coming into the workforce with a ton of experience. Typically, they can improve within 30, 60, or 90 days if they're motivated. And we're basically putting it together just like a written warning. You've got maybe 2 or 3 areas that they need to improve upon. You've provided examples, impact, and action. HR would be in that meeting when you present that performance improvement plan. We'd provide any additional insight, sign the document, date it, put it in their personnel file, and then also have those update meetings documented on the form as well. So finally, if you look back at everything that we've talked about and you didn't put any of those things into place, you didn't follow any of those appropriate actions, the consequences of that is there's a potential for lower employee morale. And that comes into play when you don't discipline people and you have your high performers looking at you like, why is my boss not managing this? This individual is slacking off. We have to cover for them or do their work. So that lowers their morale. And, the worst case scenario in those situations is they start to get resentful of you. They may not respect you as a leader. Some of them will come to the point where they don't want to work for you anymore. So now they're leaving the organization, which could also increase turnover because if that star performer left, other people may not want to work there either because now the workload's falling on them. An employee who maybe was terminated without any documentation, they may decide to file an EEOC filing. Let's say they're in a protected class, like they're, over 40, maybe they're Hispanic or African American or any of those things, or a woman over 40. They could go to the EEOC and say, this person, this company discriminated against me. I never knew there were these issues and they just terminated me. And if the EEOC comes in to investigate, be prepared that they can also invite the Department of Labor to do an investigation as well. And now you've got 2 regulatory bodies in your house, and that could lead to fines of all sorts. It doesn't have to be directed at the initial investigation. You could get a lawsuit, so even, I've had organizations that they decide to give someone a severance agreement, they call it restructuring, and then they hire somebody else younger into a similar role, but maybe at a lower level. That individual finds out and they sue you for discrimination. Now you've got a lawsuit to pay out. So what's the repercussions of that? The individual could maybe want their job back because they want to stay employed, even if they have to deal with you. They could get back pay. And then because of the lawsuit that you had to pay, it may increase your employer practices liability insurance, which nobody wants to pay more for the insurance that they have today, right? You could lose an unemployment hearing because you didn't document it appropriately. Now, granted, in Illinois, I've had some challenges when it comes to performance and winning those unemployment hearings just because Illinois tends to be a little bit more lenient. But that doesn't mean that that's always going to be the case. I've also won cases here when employees were stealing time and we had a clear-cut documented process and investigation, and the judge really sided with us in that. So it can really go either way. And the last thing, if none of these things really resonate with you, I think the ultimate thing it could impact is your reputation as an organization. So with our world today, everybody's on social media. They're on Glassdoor. They're tweeting about something. That employee, that disgruntled employee, could leave your organization and post some really nasty reviews on Glassdoor or Twitter or wherever. And depending on who's looking at those things or how many followers they have, that could be ruining and detrimental to your organization. And you don't want that. So you want to safeguard that and ensure that you're treating employees well, both while they're there and on their way out. And it will drastically impact how things go in the future for you. So what are some next steps? Some things that you can do right now is make sure you assess whether you really have the right performance evaluation and disciplinary tool in place. And that really depends on what your business looks like, your workforce. You want to make sure that that really coincides with who you are and what you do. Check your employee handbook to review any of your policies on performance management, on disciplinary process. Look at, usually, organizations have code of conduct. What are your no tolerance policies? All of that will coincide with what the organization sees as a very escalated thing that you would actually move towards termination. Make sure you have a termination, policy and procedure. And then apply those processes consistently. The worst thing I see is that people will treat other people differently, and it's either out of fear or maybe they know them, and that type of thing can be looked back on when you're going through a lawsuit, or if the EEOC comes in, they're going to look at how you handled any previous case that was similar, or just how you handle terminations in general. So you want to ensure that you've got that all buttoned up and that you're handling everything the same way and you're not discriminating, or it could be perceived as discrimination to an outside party. And then train those managers, employees on the performance evaluation process. How do we carry out, an effective evaluation meeting? And how do we, even from the employee side, a lot of employees don't really understand how to present themselves in a performance evaluation. So how do they do their updates on their goals? How do they show up? How can they do better on their self-assessments that will really impact their performance? Make sure that you're paying for performance. So, are you doing merit tied to their performance evaluation? Because a lot of employees are not motivated by a performance evaluation process because it's not linked with merit. So they're thinking, well, if I'm not going to get an increase because of how well I do, why should I bother? So that's something as an organization, we really have to work out that timeline so the review process coincides with when we decide on the financial increase piece. Also look at your company's disciplinary process and make sure it fits, and make sure that people are trained on that. And the other things I didn't put on this slide, but I still think it's critical for us to talk about, is having a good onboarding program. So, I talked about earlier this whole employee experience and people really wanting to start off their job successfully and feeling like, hey, I made the right decision. Like, this company is awesome. They have taken me in. They've given me all this information. They're, really educating me so I can be a smarter individual within the organization. A lot of times we have a one-day new hire orientation. We drop them off in their job and then we just expect them to do it. And it's really hard for an employee to be successful and feel good about the decision that they just made when your onboarding program isn't really all in comprehensive. So think about that. And then I think about total rewards programs and how you recognize individuals. Look at that. Is that really competitive in the marketplace? For the types of roles and individuals you're recruiting for, are you even comparing to your competitors? Are you beyond what they offer? Or could you offer something different that would be more meaningful to the employees? And then, think about how you're managing your high performers. So are you looking into coaching programs, training programs? Are you doing succession planning today? So when people are getting to that point where they're looking for those stretch assignments and where they're going to go in the organization, are you ready for that? And if not, start thinking about it. And then if you're not really sure where your workforce stands or where you have gaps, do an employee engagement survey. I think it's a great way for managers and leaders within the organization to really understand where they fall as an organization, as a department. I had a group at a hospital, and we could not figure out why we were losing so many employees. We had them coming through our education program. They were getting their degrees with us. We were providing internships, paid internships, and then a job opportunity at the end. And once we assessed everything, we figured out the managers that we put in place weren't trained to be managers, and therefore they weren't treating employees appropriately because of who was leading them. And that leader was very aggressive and demeaning to the employees. We found out that our recruitment processes weren't very good, so we had to change our strategy with that. We had an understanding that our compensation was not appropriate or competitive in the marketplace based on what we were asking our people to do. So we increased that. So once you kind of get into the details and really figure out what's going wrong, you can make some really huge improvements. And everything that you do, through the engagement survey, you can communicate your findings back to the employees and then define an action plan to show them that you're really invested in making those improvements, which I think is critical for them to see, because they will be so much more loyal to you once they know how invested you are in making a difference. So that's all I have for today. I'd like to open up and see what kind of questions or comments or key takeaways you may have for me. Definitely open to whatever you've got going on. I'm trying to help you out.
So, Stephanie, we do have a few questions already in the loop here.
Okay.
Julie would like to know if it's appropriate to talk about rankings with staff during the performance review process.
Well, it depends on the ranking. So if it's just the ranking scale, like, you're providing, exceeds and so forth, that's normal because that's just your evaluation method. But where they stand within the organization, I wouldn't do it right then and there. I think there's an opportunity to talk to those high performers to say this is where you're at and this is where you'd like to be. And same thing for the low performers. You're addressing their specific performance. So how are they not meeting? I wouldn't compare them to others unless it's just a matter of saying everyone who's at a project management level is doing this many projects with this kind of scale, and you're not meeting those needs.
April shot us a question while you were talking about meeting with the employee and the fight or flight mode. She was wondering if you had any advice if the employee shows up in fight mode.
So I have had that happen, and it's always a little off-putting, but I always prepare myself for anything. And my initial reaction is always keep your tones low. I have found that when I'm speaking at a lower tone than they are, they eventually come down because they realize no one else is fighting them. If it gets to the point that this individual cannot have a conversation, we end the meeting and we dismiss them. If it had gotten too out of hand, I might tell them to go home and think about what transpired, and I want to see them first thing tomorrow morning, and you have a meeting set to regroup. And again, it may depend on what you're talking to them about. If this is really a heavy employee relations issue and it's already around their behavior in the workplace and them acting out, and this is a consistent pattern, you may want to send them to your employee assistance program or your EAP to get some additional help.
Excellent. Jennifer, and this is great to ask a consultant. Jennifer would like to know what you can do if the performance issues are actually in the Human Resources Department.
And does that mean that you're the manager of the Human Resources Department? Or
I'm
is
assuming,
this from a colleague?
yes. I'm assuming she's overseeing the HR department. She's having performance issues within that department.
Well, you want to address those immediately. I've worked in, so many different HR departments, and it's so frustrating when we don't even do what we're supposed to be doing. You tend to look really bad when you're advising leaders to take these actions, and then as HR, we can't do the same. You kind of lose all credibility in the marketplace when you do that. So if I were you, you want to nip that in the bud as soon as possible and making sure that you're taking action. Obviously, you can't communicate that out to your team that you're taking action, but they should be seeing a difference in that individual.
Excellent. And then Kim said you had, I don't remember you were repeating this, but she indicated you were talking about 3 buckets, and she was trying to write down the 3 buckets. She got accountability, but she didn't get the other 2. Do you remember?
And those can be different, Kim. So I think that's a great question because you just have to decipher what they're really going to be. It might be accountability. It could be a competency issue. It could be attitude. It could be all sorts of things. Issues with meeting deadlines, that could be another bucket. So you have to, what I do is I kind of assess all the issues and then I put them in categories so that it's easier for the employee to digest what's going wrong and how we can focus our efforts on fixing it.
Okay, great. Sonia wants to ask a question about self-evaluation. She wants to know if you think they're helpful. Her experience is that many employees go ahead and rate themselves higher than perhaps she would rate them. So she wants to know what your thoughts are about self-evaluation.
I think that's a great question. And that's why I put it out there because I feel like I really get a good understanding of how they see themselves and what the reality is from what I see. And ultimately, I let them know, I'm the boss. And because I'm the boss, I have a certain level of expectation that I'm trying to meet because this is what the organization is asking for. And so, you may be a little bit off. This is what I'm seeing. And you want to make sure that they really understand what's the difference between what you see and what they see and how that can change. Now, some employees are not willing to rise to the occasion or they get really defensive about it. But that's where you'll see the ones that really care will get aggravated and they want to prove you wrong, which I'm okay with. I'm totally okay with that. The other thing is I would just say make sure you're educating your employees on how to fill those self-evals out because many times I see them not really putting a whole lot of effort into them because they don't really understand the value of what the manager's looking at when they review those.
Okay, great. That's all the questions that have been submitted thus far. If anybody has anything that comes up later on, you have Stephanie's contact information. You, of course, have mine. I know how to find her, even when she's hiding. So I can shoot stuff to her. But we'll go ahead and in the webinar now, as I said, the online poll will pop up when I close it. If you need those certification credits, please let me know. Stephanie, thank you so much for helping me out today.
Yeah, thank you all. It was great.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
You too.